Hey, how's it going, everybody? If you're new here, welcome in. And if you've been here before, welcome back. I'm Rollshambo, the connoisseur and collector of all things sharp and shiny. And today I am very excited to talk about the new Microtech Matrix. And this was not a knife that was given to me. This was not a knife that was lent to me. This is a knife that I did a knife swap for with my buddy Knife Dope. Shout out to Jason, aka Knife Dope. This is a knife that I do in fact consider to be a grail. It's a knife that has a storied history. It's got a past, and it's very exciting to see back in circulation once again. You see, the initial design of this one came from 2011 with zero tolerance on their 0777 model, which was an award-winning knife. And there's a lot to unpack there. I'm not going to go into too many details, but I'll put it to you like this. Zero Tolerance, aka Kershaw, approached Tony Marfione of Microtech Knives at a blade show almost 13 years ago and challenged Microtech to make their knife better than they did. And by a general consensus, they did. That is insanely cool. It's really awesome to think about a time when American knife manufacturers were so competitive that they would hand over a knife design and say, give me your best or don't come at all. And that's what they did with the Matrix. It was so popular that Zero Tolerance, aka Kershaw, actually submitted a patent for the sub frame lock, which this resembles. It's not a sub frame lock, but it resembles it. And lawsuits ensued. I'm not going to pick a side. I'm not going to say that one was better than the other. I'm not going to go into that mess. But what I will say is this. Zero Tolerance discontinued the 0777 and replaced it with the 0770, which is a very lackluster knife that you can still buy today for about 200 bucks. The Microtech Matrix is a far cry from that. And the partnership with Rike is going to be something that many people complain about. There's going to be a ton of people that think that Microtech shouldn't have brought it back at all if they couldn't make it here in the United States. But the reason why Microtech has knives being made by Rike in China is because they wanted to make certain models that were initially customs available at a less expensive price. And I say less expensive and not cheap because this knife made by Rike in China is $450. That is no small sum. But to put this in perspective, the last time we saw a Microtech Matrix, it was the Mini Matrix, and it was a Marfione custom in 2016 that cost $800 or $900. So we're talking about half the price. Did they succeed? I think that they did. I'll let you be the judge for yourself. Let's get into it. We're looking at about 9.3 inches overall if you count the Attitude Adjuster 5000. Look at that thing. That is bananas. We have M390 on the blade with a titanium frame and a carbon fiber overlay. In lieu of the Microtech tri-wing screws, we have a Torx screw setup. I'm assuming that that's there because the tri-wing screws that Microtech makes are in-house. And I'm assuming that that's why we have Torx on this one and not, in fact, tri-wing. It could also be that Microtech is moving away from the tri-wing screws due to popular demand, as seen on this Microtech Stitch, which also has Torx screws. On the inside of the handle scales, there is no internal milling. That is primarily because there's no room for it, because the carbon fiber is overlaid on the existing titanium, so there's no way that they could really fit in internal milling. We're looking at an overall weight of about 6 ounces. Considering that this knife is 9.3 inches long overall, that's actually not bad. In fact, when I hold this knife, it doesn't necessarily feel like it weighs even 6 ounces, but that could just be the fact that it has really good balance. For a QC check, let's check it out. The blade is centered. The detent, the detent is really good. That action is flawless, and it's running on ceramic bearings, and it just glides home. For such a big knife, that action is really good. We've got a deployment window and what is continued into a fuller. Now, the original Microtech Matrix had just a fuller that went the entire length of the blade. The Mini Matrix had this exact same blade shape with the window and then the continued fuller here at the top. What's really neat is seeing this two-tone finish. We have a bead blast on the hollow grind and then a directional high grit satin finish on those flats. On the spine of the blade, it transitions from jimping to a flat to crowning, and the crown spine on here is very, very cool. Crowning is generally something we only see on Italian knives like Giant Mouse knives or anything made by Vox Onso. It is one of those things where I don't expect to see it, but every time I do, it always makes me smile. It allows for a very good choke up, and if you've got large size hands, this could very well fit pretty easily in them. The balance point on this knife is going to be right there where you want it with the finger cutout. How does it index? Pretty good. Absolutely no issues with the index. You get a nice grip here in a reverse grip just fine. You just have to allow your thumb to rest against the Attitude Adjuster 5000 and not on top of it. Speaking of this, some people are saying, why do we have that garish glass breaker there? Well, you know what? This was in fact also on the Microtech Mini Matrix that was released back in 2016. The difference is that this one has a tungsten ball at the tip instead of just being a sharpened piece of metal that would surely stab your hand anytime you went to put it in your pocket. Can you still rub your hand up against it? Yeah. Is it still uncomfortable? Yeah. But honestly, for a knife that is probably a grail and such a legendary design from the last 12 or 13 years, it is something that I can put up with. What's interesting is that initially when I saw this, I hated it. I hated it. And I was like, why? Why do we have that? What are we using this for? Do you know what? Do we really need an impact tool like this? Why can't we, in fact, just get a glass breaker if there has to be one like this? I'm not really even complaining about this glass breaker, even though I don't really ever use it. But that would be more tolerable than this. And then I started to think about it because I'm also a big fan of the skull clip on the Chavez knives, which many people also believe is unnecessary and garish and stinks up to high heaven of the 7-Eleven down the street. But I don't necessarily think that it does. I feel like it's a signature piece, and given that they try to make these as close to the custom versions as possible, I understand it, and I respect the fact that at the very least they changed that from a sharpened tip to a tungsten ball. Tells me that they're also thinking of that too. Now, we don't have a single-sided captive pivot, but that is something that I can live with. We have these blue titanium pivot collars, which is fine, and then of course the ball bearing pocket clip, which is interesting to me because that was actually initially a Todd Begg design. However, we're now seeing them on more and more Microtech knives, like for example, the Microtech Hera. I really like it because it's one of those clips that's not going to tear up your pocket when it goes in and out of the pocket. That's nice. It allows for seamless sliding both in and out without issue and without catching. It's very good, very well done, and I, for one, am a fan. Let's go ahead and do a quick size comparison up against another knife, and there really can only be one knife to do a size comparison with this, and that's going to be the Microtech Stitch. This is the Ramlock Stitch. I love this knife. This was one of my favorite acquisitions of 2023. I do not apologize for it. I always wanted one. I got it, and it's fantastic. The Stitch is not a small knife by anyone's standards, but it does look small compared to the Microtech Matrix. The Matrix is longer, even if you were to take off this glass breaker. Something that I think is pretty cool is that if you are someone that does not like it and will not like it and would buy this knife if you didn't have to have it, the good news is that you can actually remove the glass breaker. If you look on the inside and you can't see it very well, but there is in fact a Torx screw holding this in. So if you were to take off one scale and then remove this, you could in fact remove it and replace it with a flathead Torx screw. You might have to get that flathead Torx screw custom made, but I don't actually think that that would be too expensive. For me, I'm not going to do that. I thought I might at first, but the more I carry this, the more I check this out, the more I'm willing to accept that this is just a part of the original custom design. There's many things that I like about this knife. First of all is the ergos. The ergos are, well, they're flawless. I really like the way that this fits in the hand, and I think that people with bigger hands are going to appreciate that too. The indexing is really good, and that can only be done with superb balance. That is a shout out to Rike's ability to manufacture something really well. The blade shape is also one that I'm a fan of. It's almost a sheep's foot, but it's almost a spear point, but it's almost a drop point. It's just cool. It's just really, really cool. Aesthetically speaking, this knife is gorgeous. Absolutely fantastic. And then I'm also a huge fan of the fact that we actually do in fact have standardized Torx screws. Now, what size are these Torx screws? Let's go ahead and do a quick hardware check. This is a T8 Torx bit. Those are T8 body screws. And that is going to be a T15 pivot screw. Let's see, let's confirm. T15, does it fit? That actually might be a T20 because this is a T15 and there's plenty of play there. I don't have a Torx 20 out on my desk because I just don't have many knives that actually utilize that. In fact, I think this might be the first. This might be the first with a T20 pivot. Insanity. It makes these T8 Torx screws look like T6s. Now, at the $450 price range, does any of that matter? Would anybody actually carry this? Yeah, I would. I would absolutely carry this. This blade shape and the blade geometry and the edge geometry lends to some really great cutting action. Let me show you what I mean. You can absolutely cut slivers off of paper with this, and while most knives can in fact cut paper, it's how well and how clean and how silky smooth that action going through the paper is that really tells you how good the edge is and how good the edge geometry is. This is a slicer, make no doubt about it. And we've arrived at the moment in which I want to talk about something that I don't like, because amidst everything that I love about this knife, there is one thing that makes me quite upset, and you'll have to let me know if you agree. I have an issue with the way that Microtech is releasing their knives recently. They're releasing knives in small batches, whether they're made here in the United States, like this Microtech Stitch, or whether they're made by Rike in China, like this Microtech Matrix. They're releasing them in small batches. They're selling out extremely quickly. This one that I got from Knife Dope was in fact one of the first, if not the first releases, and they were sold out in a matter of a few minutes, and that wasn't even being sold on Microtech's website. They were sold out so quickly, and Microtech says, oh, don't worry, there'll be more, and they do just more and more limited small batch drops, and they sell out quickly. The problem I have is that most of them are not in fact going directly to the consumer. They're going to scalpers. I did a quick search on eBay, and what I found was pretty upsetting. I found several of these being sold for $600, $700, $800, and they sold at that price. That's disgusting to me, because while knife scalpers have as much right as anyone to buy their knives, it bothers me that the true enthusiasts are being kicked out of the checkout line by scalpers who will just turn around and sell these for an absurd price. Especially these that are made by Rike. The whole point was to make this available at a less expensive price. At the $700 price point, that's competing with the custom model that was originally made by Microtech in 2016. That's not acceptable to me. And Microtech has released many statements saying one per household, or no, we're kicking bots out of the checkout line. But obviously they're not, because when you see one seller with 3 or 4 of these and they're selling them at a much higher price, that's absolutely disgusting. And if you agree with me on that point, I want you to smash that subscribe button, because you, my friend, are in good company. now that I've got that venting out of the way, I want to say that I'm really happy that they brought back the Matrix. This is one of those knife designs which is unapologetic. Microtech is not apologizing for having this made in China. They're not apologizing for having Rike do the manufacturing, a company which quite frankly is way more capable at producing this level of quality than anybody that they could have partnered with here in the United States. Some of you might disagree with that. Some of you are screaming from the mountaintops that this is us losing our freedom and that we should just let freedom ring at the $800 price point and accept mediocre. But for a knife that was originally born out of competition, out of a desire to be better, I think that it's quite fitting that this version would in fact be better than anything Microtech could make at the same price.